They claimed they couldn't help me with rent while I finished school and paid off my brother's credit card debt so he could start fresh. I took a remote job and disappeared. Years later, I walked into a company I owned right as my dad was asking the receptionist if I worked there. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how my parents' blatant favoritism turned me into someone they didn't recognize, and how karma came back to bite them in ways they never saw coming. Growing up, I always knew my younger brother Tyler was the golden child. He was the athlete, the charmer, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. I was the quiet, studious one, the daughter who got straight A's but somehow never quite measured up to Tyler's latest football touchdown or his ability to make everyone laugh at family dinners. My parents, Linda and Robert, owned a successful accounting firm in our mid-sized Ohio town. They weren't millionaires, but they were comfortable, upper middle class with a nice house, 2 cars, and the ability to take annual vacations to Florida. They could afford to help both their children, but as I learned the hard way, could afford and would choose to are 2 very different things. The first real crack in our family foundation appeared during my senior year of college. I was studying computer science at Ohio State, working part-time at a campus coffee shop, and barely scraping by. My rent for a tiny studio apartment was $650 a month, and between tuition, books, food, and basic living expenses, I was drowning financially. I had taken out student loans, but they didn't cover everything, and I was too proud to max out credit cards like some of my classmates. I remember the exact conversation that changed everything. It was a cold February evening, and I had called my parents from my apartment, where I was eating ramen noodles for the 4th night in a row because I had $23 in my checking account and payday wasn't for another week. "Dad, I hate to ask this, but I'm really struggling with rent this month," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've been working as many hours as I can while keeping up with my classes, but I'm coming up short. Could you maybe help me out with $300? I'll pay you back as soon as I graduate and get a real job." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear my mom talking in the background, but I couldn't make out the words. "Sarah, honey, you know we'd love to help," my dad finally said, using that patronizing tone that made my stomach clench. "But things are tight right now. We've got the business loan payment, your mother's medical bills from her surgery last year, and Tyler's car just needed major repairs. We're just not in a position to help with your rent right now." I felt my heart sink. What about just $200? Or even $100? I'm not asking for much, and I promise I'll pay it back. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. We just can't swing it right now. But hey, this is character building. Learning to manage on your own is an important life skill. You'll figure it out." I hung up the phone and cried for an hour. Then I picked myself up, applied for 3 more part-time jobs, and somehow managed to scrape together the rent money by selling my textbooks and working double shifts at the coffee shop. I told myself that my parents were right, this was character building. I was learning to be independent and self-reliant. That illusion shattered completely 3 weeks later. I had driven home for Tyler's 20th birthday celebration, even though I could barely afford the gas money. The family was gathered around our dining room table, and Tyler was opening presents. He had already gotten a new laptop, some expensive cologne, and a gift certificate to his favorite restaurant when my dad handed him an envelope. "This one's from Mom and me," Dad said with a big smile. "We wanted to give you something special for your 20th. Tyler opened the envelope and pulled out a bank statement. His eyes widened, and he looked up at our parents with genuine shock. "You paid off my credit cards?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "All $4,800 worth," Mom said proudly. "We know you've been stressed about the debt, and we wanted you to start this new decade of your life with a clean slate. Consider it an early graduation present." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. $4,800. They couldn't spare $300 to help me with rent 3 weeks ago, but they could write a check for nearly $5,000 to clean up Tyler's shopping sprees and bar tabs. "But I thought things were tight," I said before I could stop myself. "You said you couldn't help me with rent because money was too tight." The room went quiet. My parents exchanged a look that I'll never forget, a mixture of guilt and annoyance that I had dared to bring this up during Tyler's special moment. "That's different, Sarah," Mom said, her voice taking on a defensive edge. Tyler's credit was getting damaged. This was about protecting his future. "And my education isn't about my future?" I asked, feeling my face flush with anger and embarrassment. "You're being dramatic," Dad said dismissively. "Tyler needed help with a serious financial problem. You just needed to learn some budgeting skills." Tyler, to his credit, looked uncomfortable. "Mom, Dad, maybe we could." "No, it's fine," I said, standing up from the table. "I understand completely. Happy birthday, Tyler." I left that night and drove back to my studio apartment, where I sat in my car for 20 minutes before going inside. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I was done asking my family for anything, ever again. The remaining months of my senior year were brutal, but I managed. I worked 3 part-time jobs, slept 4 hours a night, and graduated with a 3.8 GPA and a job offer from a tech company in Austin, Texas. The starting salary was $75,000, more money than I had ever imagined making right out of college. My parents came to graduation, took pictures, and acted like nothing had happened. They were proud of me, they said. They always knew I could make it on my own. I moved to Austin that summer and threw myself into my new job. I was good at it, really good. I had a natural talent for coding and system architecture, and my work ethic, honed by years of struggling to make ends meet, set me apart from my peers. Within 6 months, I had been promoted. Within a year, I was leading a small team. But the real change wasn't professional, it was personal. I stopped calling my parents regularly. I stopped coming home for holidays. When they called me, I was polite but distant. They seemed puzzled by my coolness, but they never directly addressed what had happened. I think they genuinely believed that I had overreacted and would eventually get over it. Meanwhile, Tyler was struggling. He had graduated from college with a degree in communications and was bouncing between entry-level marketing jobs, never quite finding his footing. Every time I talked to my parents, they mentioned how worried they were about him, how they were helping him with his rent while he figured things out, how they had co-signed for his new car loan. The final straw came during Thanksgiving of my second year in Austin. I had flown home for the holiday, thinking that maybe enough time had passed for us to move forward as a family. I was wrong. Tyler was still living at home, supposedly saving money, and my parents were treating him like he was going through some kind of temporary rough patch rather than acknowledging that he was a 22-year-old man who had never learned to take care of himself. During dinner, my mom mentioned that they had helped Tyler with his student loan payments that month because he was between jobs. When I asked how much they had helped him with, the answer was $800. "We're just trying to help him get back on his feet," Dad explained, as if paying your adult son's bills was the most natural thing in the world. "He's been getting back on his feet for 2 years," I pointed out. "At what point does helping become enabling?" "Sarah, you don't understand," Mom said. "You've always been so independent, so capable. Tyler needs more support." "I needed support too," I said quietly. "I needed $300 for rent during my senior year, and you told me no because money was tight. But Tyler can't go a month without financial help." "That's ancient history," Dad said with a wave of his hand. "Why are you still dwelling on that?" That's when I realized they would never see it. They would never acknowledge the double standard, never recognize how their favoritism had shaped both Tyler's learned helplessness and my fierce independence. I was fighting a battle that couldn't be won. So I stopped fighting. After that Thanksgiving, I quietly began to disappear from their lives. I stopped coming home for holidays. I stopped calling. When they called me, I kept the conversations brief and surface level. I sent Christmas and birthday cards, but I stopped visiting. I stopped sharing news about my promotions, my raises, my life. By my 3rd year in Austin, I had been promoted to senior developer and was making $95,000. By my 4th year, I was a lead architect making $120,000. I bought a house, adopted a dog, and built a life that was entirely my own. My parents seemed baffled by my distance, but they never pushed too hard. They had Tyler to focus on, after all. He was still struggling, still needing help, still providing them with someone to rescue and feel needed by. Then something interesting happened. In my 5th year in Austin, I was approached by a headhunter about a remote position with a startup in Silicon Valley. The base salary was $140,000, plus equity, plus the ability to work from anywhere. I took the job and moved to Portland, Oregon, because I had always loved the Pacific Northwest. The startup was developing enterprise software solutions, and I quickly became instrumental in their growth. When the company was acquired 2 years later, my equity was worth $300,000. I used that money, plus my savings, to start my own consulting firm specializing in digital transformation for mid-sized businesses. My business grew faster than I had ever imagined. I had a gift for understanding what businesses needed to modernize their operations, and I was ruthless about delivering results. Within 3 years, I had a team of 12 consultants and was clearing $400,000 in annual profit. Within 5 years, I had expanded into 3 states and was running a multi-million-dollar operation. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents owned a small accounting firm in Ohio. I owned a tech consulting company that was probably worth more than everything they had built in 30 years. But they didn't know that, because I had learned long ago not to share my successes with people who had never supported my struggles. I bought a beautiful house in the hills outside Portland, drove a Tesla, and took vacations to Europe. I dated, made friends, and built a life that was rich and fulfilling. The only thing missing was family, but I had made my peace with that absence. Or so I thought. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, 7 years after I had moved to Portland. I was in my office, reviewing quarterly reports, when my phone rang. Tyler's name appeared on the screen. We hadn't spoken in over a year, so I was surprised to see his call. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Sarah? Tyler's voice sounded strained, younger than his 29 years. Hey, Tyler. How are you? I'm not good, actually. That's why I'm calling. There was a long pause. Mom and Dad cut me off. I set down my pen and leaned back in my chair. What do you mean, cut you off? They said I'm 30 years old and it's time for me to figure out my life without their help. They're not going to help with my rent anymore, or my car payment, or anything. They want me to be self-sufficient like you. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Okay. So what are you planning to do? I don't know. Tyler's voice cracked slightly. Sarah, I've never actually supported myself. Not really. They've always been there to catch me when I fall, and now I'm scared. For a moment, I felt genuine sympathy for my brother. It wasn't his fault that our parents had created this dynamic, never requiring him to develop the skills I had been forced to learn through necessity. Tyler, you're smart and capable, I said gently. It's going to be an adjustment, but you can figure this out. Could you help me? Just until I get on my feet? And there it was. The same request I had made 8 years ago, when I needed $300 for rent. The request that had been denied because money was too tight. I can't do that, Tyler. Why not? Sarah, you're doing well, right? I mean, you've got that tech job, you're living in Portland. It's not about the money, I said, though that wasn't entirely true. It was partially about the money, about the fact that they had never helped me but had spent thousands helping him over the years. It's about the fact that getting help from family when you need it has never been an option for me. I learned to be self-sufficient because I had to. Now it's your turn. Tyler was quiet for a long time. Then he said, That's cold, Sarah. I'm your brother. You were my brother when I was eating ramen noodles for dinner 4 nights a week during my senior year of college. Where was family loyalty then? I hung up the phone and tried to focus on work, but I couldn't shake the conversation. I wasn't proud of refusing to help Tyler, but I also wasn't going to enable the same pattern that our parents had created. If he needed to learn to stand on his own, then this was how it started. Over the next 6 months, I heard bits and pieces about Tyler's struggles through the family grapevine, mutual cousins and family friends who still maintained contact with everyone. He had moved into a studio apartment, taken a job at a call center, and was apparently learning what it meant to budget and prioritize expenses. It sounded like he was actually growing up, which made me oddly proud of him. But then I heard something else that made my blood boil. My parents had apparently decided that Tyler's sudden financial independence was somehow my fault. They blamed me for being a bad influence, for being selfish, for refusing to help my brother in his time of need. They had started telling people that I had changed since moving away, that success had made me cold and uncaring. The final piece of information came from my cousin Jessica, who called me in March. Sarah, I thought you should know, Jessica said carefully. Your parents are telling people that they're worried about you. They're saying that you've become materialistic and that you've forgotten your family values. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Family values. They're also saying they're going to try to visit you in Portland. Your dad mentioned something about flying out there to reconnect with you. That call filled me with a cold dread. The last thing I wanted was my parents showing up at my house, trying to guilt me into resuming a relationship that had never been healthy to begin with. I had worked too hard to build my life to let them come in and disrupt it with their manipulation and double standards. But as it turned out, they didn't need to come to Portland to find me. Fate had something much more dramatic in store. In May of that year, I got a call from a potential client in Columbus, Ohio, less than 2 hours from my hometown. They were a mid-sized manufacturing company that needed a complete overhaul of their IT infrastructure, and they were willing to pay premium rates for the right consultant. The project would take about 6 months and would be worth nearly $200,000 to my company. I hadn't been back to Ohio since that disastrous Thanksgiving 7 years earlier, but this was too good an opportunity to pass up. I decided to take the project and base myself in Columbus for the duration. What I didn't expect was how much I would enjoy being back in the Midwest. Columbus had grown and modernized since I was in college, and I found myself appreciating things about Ohio that I had forgotten during my years on the coasts. I rented a nice apartment downtown and settled in for what I thought would be a straightforward consulting engagement. The project was going exceptionally well. My team had already improved the client's system efficiency by 40%, and they were so impressed that they were talking about additional projects and a possible long-term partnership. I was feeling proud of the work we had done and confident about the future of my business. That's when I got the idea that would change everything. My client, Morrison Manufacturing, was looking for a long-term IT consulting partner. They wanted someone local, someone who understood their business and could provide ongoing support as they continued to grow. They had hinted that they might be willing to offer an exclusive contract worth $500,000 annually. But I had an even better idea. Instead of just consulting for Morrison, I proposed acquiring their IT operations entirely. I would form a subsidiary company, hire their current IT staff, and take over all their technology needs under a comprehensive service agreement. It would be a win-win. They would get dedicated, expert support, and I would get a stable, profitable operation in the Ohio market. The negotiations took 2 months, but we eventually reached a deal. I formed a new company called TechBridge Solutions, acquired Morrison's IT assets, and hired their staff. Overnight, I had gone from being a consultant to owning a full-service IT company in Columbus. I decided to open a proper office rather than just running the operation remotely. I found a beautiful space in a modern office building in downtown Columbus, nothing too flashy, but professional and well-appointed. I hired a receptionist, a project manager, and 2 additional consultants. By August, TechBridge Solutions was a legitimate, growing business. I was proud of what I had built. In less than 10 years since graduation, I had gone from a college student who couldn't afford rent to a successful entrepreneur with operations in multiple states. I had done it entirely on my own, without a penny of help from my family. Which is why what happened next felt so much like destiny. It was a Thursday morning in September, and I was running late for a meeting with a potential new client. I had been stuck on a call that ran long, and I was rushing to get to my office to pick up some materials before heading across town. I pushed through the glass doors of my building and was walking quickly toward the elevator when I heard a familiar voice at the reception desk. "Excuse me, I'm looking for someone who works here. My daughter's name is Sarah Mitchell. She's in tech consulting, and I heard she might be working in this building." I froze. My father was standing at the reception desk, talking to Kelly, my receptionist. He looked older than I remembered, grayer, more lined around the eyes, but it was definitely him. He was wearing a suit that I recognized from family photos, and he had that slightly lost expression he always got when he was trying to navigate unfamiliar territory. "I'm sorry, sir," Kelly was saying politely, "but I don't have anyone by that name listed in our directory. Are you sure you have the right building?" "I think so," Dad said, sounding frustrated. "I called her company, but they said she was working on a project in Columbus. Someone told me she might be in this building." I stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching my father try to track down his daughter who had been standing right behind him. Part of me wanted to turn around and walk out, to avoid this confrontation entirely. But another part of me, the part that had been waiting 8 years for this moment, wanted to see this play out. I walked up to the reception desk. "Kelly, could you please tell this gentleman who owns TechBridge Solutions?" Kelly looked confused for a moment, then smiled. "Of course. TechBridge Solutions is owned by Sarah Mitchell. That's our boss." The color drained from my father's face as he turned around and saw me standing behind him. "Sarah?" His voice came out as barely a whisper. "Hi, Dad." We stared at each other for a long moment. I could see him trying to process what Kelly had just said, trying to reconcile the daughter he thought he knew with a woman standing in front of him in a tailored business suit in the lobby of her own company. You own this company?" "I do. But I thought you were just working on a consulting project here." "I was. Then I decided to expand my business into the Ohio market. TechBridge Solutions is my newest acquisition." Dad looked around the lobby, taking in the modern furniture, the company logo on the wall, the general air of success and professionalism. "How long have you been? I mean, when did I start my own company?" "About 6 years ago." "When did I become successful enough to acquire other businesses?" "About 3 years ago." "When did I become financially independent enough to own a company worth several $1,000,000? I paused, letting that sink in. "About the same time you and Mom decided that Tyler needed to learn to be self-sufficient." The receptionist was trying very hard to look busy with paperwork, but I could tell she was following every word of this conversation. "Sarah, I had no idea," Dad said weakly. You never told us about any of this. You never asked. And frankly, I learned a long time ago that my accomplishments weren't really of interest to you and Mom unless they somehow related to Tyler. Dad flinched as if I had slapped him. That's not fair. Isn't it? Tell me, Dad, why are you here? In Columbus, looking for me? He shifted uncomfortably. We were worried about you. We heard that you had refused to help Tyler when he was struggling, and your mother and I thought maybe we should try to reconnect. To understand what happened to our family. I felt a familiar anger rising in my chest, but this time it was different. This time I wasn't a broke college student begging for help. This time I was standing in the lobby of my own company, financially successful beyond anything my parents had ever achieved, and I finally had the power to say everything I had wanted to say for 8 years. What happened to our family, I said slowly, is that you taught me that I couldn't depend on you when I needed help, and you taught Tyler that he could always depend on you no matter what. You created two very different children with two very different relationships to independence and self-reliance. Sarah, we always loved you both equally. No, you didn't. My voice was calm, but there was steel in it. You loved us differently. Tyler was the one you rescued. I was the one you expected to rescue herself. And you know what? It worked out exactly the way you intended. Tyler learned to be helpless, and I learned to be self-sufficient. Congratulations. Dad looked like he wanted to argue, but he couldn't seem to find the words. The difference is, I continued, Tyler eventually had to learn to take care of himself when you cut him off. I learned to take care of myself, and then I learned to take care of a business, and then I learned to take care of multiple businesses. I learned that when someone tells you they can't help you, you figure out how to help yourself. And sometimes you figure out how to help yourself so well that you become more successful than the people who refused to help you in the first place. I could see the exact moment when the full implication of what I was saying hit him. His eyes widened slightly as he realized that I, the daughter who couldn't get $300 for rent, now owned a company that was probably worth more than his accounting firm. Sarah, if I could go back and change things, you can't. And honestly, I'm not sure I'd want you to. Being forced to become self-reliant was the best thing that ever happened to me, even though it hurt at the time. I built all of this, I gestured around the lobby because I learned that the only person I could truly depend on was myself. We're proud of you, Dad said quietly. We always have been. I laughed, and I could hear the bitterness in my own voice. Are you proud of me, Dad? Or are you just shocked that the daughter you wrote off as overly dramatic and entitled turned out to be more financially successful than your golden child? That's not. We never wrote you off. You wrote me off the minute you decided that Tyler's $4,800 credit card debt was worth paying off, but my $300 rent shortage was my problem to solve. You wrote me off when you decided that helping him was protecting his future but helping me was enabling my dependence. You wrote me off when you spent years giving him money while telling him he was just going through a rough patch, but you expected me to develop character through financial struggle. Dad opened his mouth to respond, but I held up my hand. I'm not angry anymore, I said, and I was surprised to realize that it was true. I was angry for a long time, but anger is exhausting and counterproductive. I channeled that energy into building something instead. Then why haven't you called? Why haven't you come home? Because I learned that home isn't a place where you have to prove your worth over and over again. Home is a place where your worth is assumed. I built myself a home where I don't have to compete for love or support or basic respect. We stood there in silence for a moment. I could see Dad struggling with something, and I wondered if this was the closest he had ever come to understanding the impact of his choices. Finally, he said, "What can I do to fix this?" It was the question I had been waiting 8 years to hear, but now that he had asked it, I realized I didn't have an answer. I don't think it can be fixed, I said gently. I think too much time has passed, and we've all become different people. I'm not the struggling college student who needed help with rent. Tyler's not the irresponsible kid who needed constant rescuing. And you and Mom aren't the parents of small children anymore. We're all adults now, with different lives and different priorities. But we're still family. Are we? Because family is supposed to support each other, and family is supposed to be there when times get tough. I learned that I couldn't count on you and Mom when times got tough, so I built a life where I don't need to count on anyone. That's not a bad thing, it's actually been incredibly freeing, but it's also not the kind of life that leaves a lot of room for family relationships. Dad looked like I had punched him in the stomach. Sarah, please. Don't give up on us completely. I sighed and checked my watch. I was now 20 minutes late for my meeting, but this conversation felt more important than any business deal. I'm not giving up on anything, Dad. I'm just being realistic about what our relationship can and can't be. You and Mom have Tyler to worry about and support and feel needed by. I have a business to run and a life to live. Maybe that's enough for all of us. It's not enough for me, Dad said, and for the first time in the conversation, his voice cracked slightly. I want to be part of your life. I want to know about your business and your house and your achievements. I want to be able to tell people about my daughter who owns her own company instead of having to admit that I don't really know what my daughter does for a living. That admission hung in the air between us, and I felt something shift in my chest. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was recognition that my father was finally seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Then you're going to have to accept that I'm not the same person I was 8 years ago, I said. I'm not going to pretend that what happened didn't matter, and I'm not going to go back to being the daughter who needs your approval or your financial help. I'm successful on my own terms, and I'm proud of what I've built. I can accept that, Dad said quickly. I want to accept that. And you're going to have to accept that my relationship with Tyler is probably never going to be the same. I'm not interested in being the safety net that you and Mom used to be for him. He's an adult, and he needs to handle his own problems. Dad nodded, though I could see that this was harder for him to swallow. And most importantly, you're going to have to accept that I don't need to be rescued or fixed or saved. I'm not a problem that needs solving. I'm a successful adult who built a good life after learning that she couldn't depend on her family for support. I understand, Dad said, though I wasn't sure he really did yet. I looked at my watch again and made a decision. I have to go to a meeting. But if you want to grab dinner tonight, we can talk more. There's a restaurant called The Avenue downtown, meet me there at 7. Dad's face brightened slightly. Yes. I'd like that very much. Good. And Dad? Don't bring Tyler. This conversation is between us. I walked past him toward the elevator, then turned back. Oh, and one more thing. When people ask what your daughter does for a living, you can tell them she owns a multi-million-dollar technology consulting company with operations in 4 states. I think that has a nice ring to it, don't you? The elevator doors closed before he could respond, but I could see the expression on his face through the glass. It was pride mixed with regret mixed with something that looked like awe. Dinner that night was awkward at first, but we eventually found our way to a real conversation. Dad told me about the struggles with the family business, about Tyler's gradual progress toward independence, about Mom's ongoing guilt over how things had played out between us. I told him about my company, about my house in Portland, about the life I had built. We didn't magically fix 11 years of hurt and misunderstanding over one dinner, but we started something. Dad drove back to our hometown the next day, but we began talking on the phone regularly. He started asking real questions about my business and my life, and I started sharing real answers. A few months later, Mom called me. It was a difficult conversation. She was more defensive than Dad had been, more insistent that they had always treated Tyler and me equally. But eventually, she admitted that maybe they had made mistakes, and maybe those mistakes had had consequences they hadn't anticipated. Tyler and I had a conversation too, eventually. He called to congratulate me on my success, and to apologize for the years of taking family support for granted. He was doing well, still working at the call center, but he had been promoted to supervisor and was taking night classes in business management. He seemed to be genuinely growing up, and I was proud of him for that. We're not close the way some siblings are, but we're not estranged either. We text occasionally, and we're civil at family gatherings. It's enough. As for my parents and me, we've settled into a relationship that works for all of us. They're proud of what I've accomplished, and they've stopped trying to make me the daughter they thought they wanted me to be. I've stopped waiting for them to apologize for the past and started appreciating the effort they're making in the present. TechBridge Solutions has grown beyond my wildest expectations. We now have offices in Columbus, Cleveland, and Cincinnati, and we're looking at expanding into Kentucky and Indiana. I split my time between Ohio and Portland, and I've discovered that I actually enjoy being back in the Midwest part of the time. I bought a house in Dublin, a suburb of Columbus, and I've been dating a great guy who works in finance downtown. My parents have met him, and they like him. We've had them over for dinner a few times, and it's nice. Different from what I imagined family relationships would be like when I was younger, but nice. The best part of all of this is that I finally understand something important. Success isn't about proving your worth to people who don't see it. Success is about building a life that makes you proud, regardless of whether anyone else recognizes or appreciates what you've accomplished. My parents' favoritism toward Tyler and their refusal to help me when I needed it most was devastating at the time. But it also forced me to develop skills and resilience that I might never have discovered otherwise. I learned to depend on myself, to take risks, to work harder than I thought was possible. Would I change what happened if I could? I honestly don't know. The hurt was real, and it shaped me in ways that took years to fully understand. But the strength I developed as a result of that hurt has been the foundation of everything good in my life. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting back at the people who wronged you. Sometimes the best revenge is succeeding so completely that their opinion of you becomes irrelevant. That Thursday morning when my father walked into my building looking for his daughter, he was expecting to find someone who needed his help or his guidance. Instead, he found someone who had learned to help herself so well that she could now help others. I think that's a pretty good plot twist, don't you? Update: a lot of people have been asking about Tyler and whether he's still struggling. I'm happy to report that he's actually doing really well. He finished his business degree last year and got promoted to district manager at his company. He's engaged to a lovely woman named Amanda, and they just bought their first house together. He's learned to be self-sufficient in a way that I don't think would have been possible if our parents had continued enabling him. As for me, TechBridge Solutions just landed a major contract with the state of Ohio. We're now the official IT consulting partner for 3 state agencies, which means we're looking at another round of expansion. I never imagined that coming home to Ohio would be the key to my biggest business success, but life has a funny way of surprising you. My parents and I aren't perfect, but we're family. And sometimes that's enough.